Oliver had been away for months, and today, after what felt like a lifetime of waiting, he was finally coming home. Lily's feet shifted impatiently on the cold, tiled floor as she craned her neck, trying to catch a glimpse of him among the sea of people. She didn't mind, though. This moment wasn't about appearances. With her parents gone, it had been up to Lily to hold everything together, managing the cafe they had left her with and taking care of Oliver, who, despite being younger, often seemed to be the stronger of the two. Oliver was coming home. And then she saw him, or at least, she thought she did. A familiar figure stepped into her line of sight, tall with broad shoulders, dark hair. It was unmistakable, the same silhouette, the same confident stride. She exclaimed, burying her face into his chest. Except, this chest wasn't familiar. It wasn't the chest she had held onto in so many moments of shared laughter and tears. It was firm, way too firm. It was a feeling of something. Someone, entirely different. Lily froze. He didn't feel like him. Instead of the comforting, familiar scent of the shampoo Oliver always used, this man smelled like something sophisticated, woody, expensive cologne, far too elegant for the rough-and-tumble world Lily was used to. The look in his eyes wasn't anger, but it wasn't the warmth she'd hoped for either. No, this man had no expression of familiarity. Instead, his lips curved into a bemused smile, his eyebrow lifting slightly. Lily blinked rapidly, her mind racing for an explanation. She had just thrown herself into the arms of a stranger, a man she had never seen in her life. Her stomach turned as she looked around, suddenly hyper-aware of the stares from the people around them. "Oh my God, her words faltered. "I thought you were my brother." There was no escaping the horror of the moment. The man didn't seem angry, just bemused. She looked at him, trying to muster some level of dignity, but it was impossible. "My brother is tall," she stammered, "and has dark hair. Like you." The stranger's lips curved up in a small, polite smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Lily bit her lip, fighting the urge to laugh nervously. She had to leave. There was no other option. But as she looked around, the crowd seemed to swirl around her, making her feel even more isolated and small. "I'm so sorry." Without waiting for a response, Lily turned and hurried away, her eyes fixed ahead, refusing to make eye contact with anyone who might have witnessed the awkward scene she had just made. She pushed past the crowd, her heart pounding, praying no one would recognize her. She had never been so embarrassed in her life. Lily arrived at the cafe, still feeling the heat in her cheeks, her mind reeling from the humiliation she had caused herself at the airport. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, serving customers and managing the cafe. It was the only thing that kept her grounded, the one thing she could control. As she walked through the crowded space, weaving through tables and chairs, she made her way toward table 12. She reached for the tray in her hands, trying to shake off the lingering embarrassment from earlier, when suddenly, her eyes locked onto a familiar figure, the man from the airport. There he was, sitting at the table, just as calm and composed as before. His eyes caught hers instantly, and a small, knowing smile tugged at his lips. Lily froze for a second. It was him, the same man she had mistakenly thrown herself at in front of the entire airport. She was mortified all over again. He sat casually, one arm resting on the back of the chair, his gray eyes fixed on her as if he had been expecting her. In fact, he looked perfectly at ease, like he belonged there, like everything that had happened earlier had been nothing more than a passing joke. She couldn't decide whether she was angry or embarrassed or just plain frustrated. He took a sip from his coffee, never once looking away from her. "Well, look at this," he said, his voice smooth. "Can I ask you something?" Lily blinked, trying to gather her thoughts. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Lily's mouth fell open. "You seemed pretty comfortable." Lily narrowed her eyes at him, a mix of irritation and disbelief flashing across her face. Before she could say anything else, her manager's voice called her name. "Lily, table 6 needs some attention." She sighed, glancing at the man at the table, who was watching her with amusement. As she walked off, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be the last time she saw Alexander Moore. As she moved through the day at the cafe, she couldn't help but steal glances at table 12, where he was sitting. His gray eyes seemed to follow her every move, watching her with an almost unsettling calmness. Her thoughts were a mess. How could I have done something so embarrassing? She had made a complete fool of herself, hugging a stranger, thinking he was her brother. But then there was the way he had looked at her. His amusement was so casual, so effortless. It almost made her feel like he was toying with her, like he found the entire situation more entertaining than she'd ever imagined. And that only made her more frustrated. As if on cue, Alexander's voice cut through her swirling thoughts. "Excuse me," he said, his tone smooth but undeniably direct. "Another coffee, please?" Lily looked up, her stomach tightening. He wasn't even trying to hide the fact that he was intentionally making things difficult for her. She could hear the faint trace of amusement in his voice, and it made her pulse quicken. But it didn't change the fact that she wanted to disappear into the floorboards. "You do a good job here." Lily didn't know how to respond to that. Good job? Was he mocking her? Complimenting her? She didn't know anymore, and frankly, she didn't want to figure it out. She forced a stiff smile, nodding before turning to leave, desperate for any distraction that could pull her away from the situation. But as she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder what was going on behind his calm demeanor. Why was he still here? What was it about her that kept him coming back? This was no ordinary customer. There had to be more to him, something beneath the surface. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was a reason he wasn't just any random billionaire showing up at a humble cafe. Maybe it's all a game to him, she thought bitterly. Maybe I'm just part of the entertainment. Lily exhaled slowly, trying to calm the storm of emotions brewing inside her. There was no denying the pull she felt toward him. Something about the way he had looked at her, the way he'd spoken, made her wonder if there was more to their interactions than just chance. But he's a millionaire. What do I have to offer someone like him? The thought made her stomach churn with discomfort. She had enough problems to deal with, between running the cafe and taking care of her brother. She didn't need the added complication of getting entangled with someone who probably saw her as nothing more than a brief distraction. As she refocused on her work, she made a silent vow to keep her distance. The last thing she needed was to fall for someone who could never be part of her world. She would never let herself be drawn in, not again. But even as she told herself this, a small, traitorous part of her couldn't help but wonder, what would it be like to let go, just for once? Lily moved through it all mechanically, her thoughts still weighed down by the memory of her earlier mistake at the airport. It had been a week since the incident, but the embarrassment still lingered. It wasn't just the hug, it was the fact that she had been so careless, so reckless in assuming it was her brother. But somehow, despite her attempts to forget him, he kept coming back. Every day, like clockwork, Table 12 became his designated spot. He never came across as arrogant or impatient, though he had the air of someone who could have anything or anyone he wanted. Lily's eyes narrowed in concentration as she worked behind the counter, preparing coffee for a table. Why does he keep coming back? She couldn't understand. After the hug, she had expected him to disappear, to go back to whatever high society world he inhabited. Yet, there he was again, always ordering the same thing, always asking for her by name. Her attention was interrupted when her manager, Martha, called her name. "Lily, Table 12 needs some service." With a sigh, Lily grabbed a fresh pot of coffee and approached the table. The moment she caught sight of him, her pulse quickened. He was sitting there as usual, with his calm demeanor. He looked like he belonged there, in a world where nothing seemed to faze him. But to Lily, he was still an enigma. As she set the coffee down in front of him, their eyes met. She felt a brief twinge of discomfort. Why couldn't she just move on? She had to remind herself that this was nothing more than a customer. The question caught her off guard, and for a moment, she couldn't think of how to respond. She set the pot down a little too forcefully, and it made a sharp clink against the saucer. Her face flushed as the memory came rushing back. That damn hug. It was impossible to escape. I was just excited to see him. Well, I'm not in the habit of lying about my mistakes, she shot back, trying to keep the conversation light. The last thing she wanted was for him to see how much it still bothered her. Fair enough, he said with a smile that seemed more genuine than before. though I'm sure you must have been embarrassed. Lily gritted her teeth. This man really doesn't let anything slide. She forced a smile and nodded. It's fine. It was just a misunderstanding. He studied her for a long moment before speaking again, his voice softer now. You don't seem the type to let something like that bother you for long. Lily felt her chest tighten. Strength? She wasn't sure how to interpret that. Was it a compliment or just an observation? And why did it matter? She was just a waitress. Why should a billionaire care what she thought of herself? I appreciate the compliment, she said curtly, but I've got work to do. She stepped back from the table, trying to put some space between them. The last thing she wanted was for this conversation to continue. But of course it did. Lily, he called out as she turned to leave. She hesitated but didn't look back. You're good at what you do. I'll give you that. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to respond to that, but she knew she couldn't let it show. Just focus, Lily. She walked away quickly, though her mind was still reeling. Good at what I do. What does he mean by that? There was a strange feeling growing in her chest, a mix of curiosity, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite put her finger on. Why does he keep saying these things to me? Later that day, as the cafe grew quieter and the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, Lily's thoughts were still consumed by Alexander. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than the billionaire persona he wore so effortlessly. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to wonder if she was curious enough to find out what that was. But she quickly shook the thought away. This is just a passing interaction. It means nothing. The next few days passed without much incident, and yet, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Alexander Moore had become a constant presence at the cafe. Despite her best efforts to ignore him, his eyes seemed to follow her every time she moved across the room. It was almost as if he was studying her, gauging her reactions. Lily was on edge, trying to focus on the task at hand. Her mind kept drifting to table 12, where Alexander had been sitting for the past few hours. Other customers came and went, but Alexander made sure to only order from her, to ask for her attention. She tried not to let it bother her, but today, it was impossible to ignore. As she made her way to his table, she felt her stomach tighten. Why do I keep letting him affect me like this? She asked herself. There was something about him that made it impossible to look away. Good afternoon, Lily, he greeted her smoothly, his voice like honey, but with a sharpness that caught her attention. Afternoon, she replied, doing her best to keep her tone neutral, even though she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. Lily nodded stiffly. Of course, mister. You can just call me Alexander, he said, his tone light, almost teasing. Right. Alexander. The shift in dynamic was subtle but unmistakable. She had been trying so hard to keep things professional, to distance herself from him and this strange pull between them. But he wasn't making it easy. Are you doing anything interesting this weekend? What was this? I don't know, just the usual, she said, trying to keep things vague. I'll probably spend time with my brother. I didn't realize you had a brother, he mused, his gaze softening. What's he like? Lily felt a surge of protectiveness. She hadn't expected to talk about Oliver, especially not with someone like Alexander. He's great, Lily said quietly. A little stubborn, but he's my family. She felt her heart thud in her chest as she spoke, the weight of her brother's health and the difficulties they were facing weighing heavily on her. Alexander's gaze softened, and there was something genuine in his expression. Family is important, he said quietly. Why did he always make everything feel so personal? I'm just trying to keep things afloat, she said, forcing a smile. Anyway, your coffee. If you ever need help, you don't have to do it all alone. The words hit her harder than she expected. She blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected offer. Help? From him? She swallowed hard, trying to compose herself. I'm fine, she said, her voice firm, though the crack in her tone betrayed her. I don't need help. Alexander didn't push her. He simply nodded, though his eyes held a trace of concern. All right. But I'm here if you change your mind. Lily turned quickly, not trusting herself to look at him any longer. Why does he do that? Why does he insist on offering me things I can't take? She wasn't sure if it was pity or genuine concern, but either way, she didn't want it. She didn't need a man, especially not someone like Alexander, to swoop in and save her. Different. As the afternoon wore on, Lily found herself distracted by thoughts of him again. She tried to focus on the customers in the cafe, but every time she passed table 12, she could feel his eyes on her, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. As she gathered her things, she glanced at table 12 one last time. Alexander was still there, finishing his coffee. He stood as she walked toward the exit, and their eyes met again. Lily paused, feeling her heart skip a beat. She hurried out the door before he could say anything else, trying to push the strange feeling that had settled in her chest aside. As she stepped into the cool night air, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement, Lily tried to shake the tension from her shoulders. She couldn't afford to let someone like Alexander Moore get too close. But deep down, she knew she was already too far gone. If you ever need help, you don't have to do it all alone. The cafe was bustling as usual that morning, but Lily wasn't fully present. She found herself glancing at table 12 more often than she should have, always meeting Alexander's gaze with that same unnerving calmness. He was there again, just as he had been every day since that first awkward meeting at the airport. It wasn't as if they had shared anything deep or meaningful. But there was something in the way he watched her, like he was always trying to figure her out. And that unsettled her more than anything. He was a man used to getting whatever he wanted, and Lily couldn't help but wonder why he was so interested in a simple waitress like herself. Her thoughts were interrupted when Alexander spoke up, his voice cutting through the hum of the cafe like it had become an intrinsic part of her daily routine. "Lily," he said, his tone smooth, yet with an edge of something unspoken. He sat there, casual, his fingers idly tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I've been thinking." Lily's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to appear composed. She asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Alexander smiled, his eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and something else. Something she couldn't quite place. "I've been thinking that maybe I could offer you a challenge." Lily raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "A challenge?" "Yeah," he said, his smile widening. "I think you could do more. You could have more." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking onto hers. "I think you've got potential, Lily. You're wasting it here, in this little cafe, playing the part of someone who's just getting by. More." She had been wary of Alexander from the very beginning. He was rich, powerful, and he didn't seem to understand what it was like to live her life. To struggle. What did he know about hard work? About sacrifice? What kind of offer are you talking about? Instead, he took a slow sip of his coffee, watching her with that same intent look. "I can get you the resources you need. All you have to do is take the first step." Lily's pulse quickened, but her instincts screamed at her to walk away. This was too easy. This was too good to be true. "I don't know, Alexander. I'm not asking you to take it. You don't have to stay stuck in this cycle." Why did he keep doing this? She didn't need him to come in here every day, throwing these grand offers at her. "Why would you even care about helping me?" She snapped, her voice sharp. "What's in it for you?" He leaned back in his chair, unfazed by her outburst. "Nothing, really. I just see potential in you. I believe you could do great things. You don't need to be in this place forever." Lily clenched her fists. This wasn't about kindness. She knew that. It never was with people like him. He had his own motives. He was just using her as a project, like he used everything else in his life to gain control. "I don't need anyone to help me," she muttered, her voice quieter but still firm. Alexander's gaze softened, but there was something determined in his eyes. "You don't have to do it all alone, Lily." Lily shook her head, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. Why couldn't he just drop it? Why couldn't he just leave her to her own life, her own path? "I don't need your charity, Alexander." He didn't argue. Instead, he just smiled, as if he had expected this reaction. "I'll be here, if you change your mind." His words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them. The day passed slowly, and as the cafe began to empty out in the late afternoon, Lily found herself more exhausted than usual. But this time, it wasn't just from the work. It was from the constant pressure of Alexander's presence in her life. She didn't want his help. She had to remind herself of that. But as the hours ticked by, she found herself thinking about his offer more than she wanted to admit. Was she really content with her life here? And then, she thought about Oliver. What if his health keeps getting worse? A small part of her, the part she had been trying to ignore, wondered if Alexander was offering her a way out, away from the constant worry, away from the cycle of exhaustion. Was it a way to take control of her own life? Or was it just another way for him to manipulate her? She had a lot to think about. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but Lily couldn't shake the lingering thoughts about Alexander's offer. Every time she passed table 12, she saw him there, calm and collected, as if he had no care in the world. And for the first time, Lily found herself wondering, what would my life be like if I took his offer? She had spent her entire life doing everything on her own, working hard, fighting to keep her family's legacy afloat, trying to make ends meet. But what if, just once, she allowed herself to accept help? What if she stopped struggling and took the chance to build something bigger? But the doubts crept in, reminding her of the reality. She was just a waitress, a far cry from the world of luxury and power that Alexander inhabited. Could she really fit in his world? It was harder than she thought. There was something in the way he saw her, not just as a waitress, but as someone with potential. The fact that he believed in her when she didn't believe in herself stirred something deep inside her. Alexander didn't let up. He continued coming in every day, ordering the same coffee, sitting at the same table. She wasn't sure why, but today, she felt the need to approach him again. The weight of his offer was too heavy to ignore, and she found herself wondering if this was the moment she needed to make a decision. Her heart raced as she crossed the floor to his table. He looked up when she approached, his eyes lighting up with that familiar intensity. "Lily," he said, his voice smooth, but this time there was something more to it, a softness that made her pause. "I've been waiting for you." Lily felt a flush creep up her neck, her nerves running wild. "Waiting for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, placing his coffee cup down. "I know you're conflicted. I don't expect you to say yes immediately." She had to know what this was all about, why he kept offering her something that seemed too good to be true. Was he trying to buy her, or was this genuine? "I've been thinking about it," she confessed, her voice shaking a little. Alexander's eyes softened. "You don't have to leave everything behind, Lily. A chance to create something that's all yours. But what do I owe you for this?" Alexander's expression grew serious, his gaze locking onto hers. "I'm not asking you to be bought. I'm offering you a partnership. An opportunity to build something, and I want to help you achieve your dreams, Lily." Her thoughts spun as she considered his words. She had worked so hard for so long, never allowing herself to think beyond the immediate needs of her cafe and her family. Could she take a leap? "You've been kind, but there's a part of me that wonders if this is just something you do for fun." Alexander leaned in, his voice earnest. "I wouldn't do this if I didn't believe in you, Lily. I believe in you, and I want to give you the chance to prove it to yourself." She sat back in her chair, stunned by his sincerity. It was hard for her to accept. She had spent so many years taking care of everyone else, always pushing her own dreams aside to keep things afloat. The silence between them stretched for a long moment before Alexander spoke again, his tone softer. "Take all the time you need." She had to make a decision, and it felt like the weight of her entire future was hanging in the balance. Could she step out of her comfort zone and trust him? "But I'm not making any promises." Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I ask." The offer was still there, lingering in the air between them, but she wasn't ready to make a decision just yet. The path ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to entertain the possibility that something bigger was out there waiting for her. As she turned away from the table, she looked over her shoulder, meeting Alexander's gaze one last time. There was a flicker of understanding in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement that this wasn't the end, but rather the beginning of something neither of them fully understood. The days that followed were a blur for Lily. His words echoed in her mind, "You're not a project to me." She had never allowed herself to dream big, never let herself entertain the idea that she might be worthy of something beyond the small cafe and her exhausting daily routine. But there was still that nagging feeling in the back of her mind, the feeling that Alexander had an ulterior motive. He wasn't just offering her an opportunity out of kindness. What did he want from her? She had to admit, a part of her was still skeptical of his intentions. Why would someone like him, someone with power, wealth, and options, care about someone like her? What could she offer him in return? The answer, she quickly realized, was nothing. And yet, despite the doubts swirling in her mind, a small part of her couldn't deny that his offer was tempting. The thought alone made her both excited and terrified. Her distractions didn't end there, though. At first, she brushed it off, assuming it was just a passing issue. The appointment was scheduled for the following week. Her fingers drummed nervously on the armrest as she looked around at the empty chairs and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights above her. She tried to distract herself by flipping through an outdated magazine, but her mind kept wandering back to her brother's condition. And Lily, who had always managed to scrape by, knew that she couldn't handle this alone. What if something was really wrong with him? She tried to keep calm, but the moment the doctor started speaking, Lily's world came crashing down. "We need to run more tests to get a clear picture, but there's a possibility that it could be something quite serious." Something serious? She felt a lump rise in her throat. She couldn't lose him. Not now, not when she was already struggling to keep everything together. The doctor outlined a few possible courses of action, but it was clear that Oliver's situation wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. And the fear of what could come next gripped her. What now? He had told her she didn't have to do everything alone, that he could help her. Could she really swallow her pride? Could she trust him enough to let him help her in a time of need? The following evening, when Lily arrived back at the cafe, her head was filled with swirling thoughts of what had happened at the doctor's office. She had barely processed the news, and yet she already felt the crushing weight of it all. She had to be strong for Oliver. But as she walked through the cafe door, she was met with a familiar sight. Alexander was sitting at his usual spot. "Lily," he greeted her softly, his voice as steady as ever. "How's your brother?" The question hit her like a wave. She had been so caught up in her own thoughts that she hadn't realized how much she had been avoiding talking to him. The guilt gnawed at her as she stood frozen in the doorway. She had been avoiding him, even though she knew deep down that she needed help. Oliver's condition was worse than she'd let on, and she had no idea how to handle it. Lily took a deep breath, gathering herself. She forced a smile and walked toward his table. "He's not doing well," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The doctor said it could be serious." Alexander's expression softened with concern. "I'm sorry to hear that, Lily. Is there anything I can do? Did he really mean it?" Lily shook her head. "But thank you." There was a pause, a moment of silence between them, before Alexander spoke again. "I told you before, Lily. You don't have to do everything on your own." She looked at him, unsure of how to respond. She couldn't handle this by herself. "Not anymore. Maybe I do need some help," she finally whispered, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. "But I'm scared, Alexander. I've spent my whole life doing everything on my own." He reached across the table, his hand gently resting on hers. "Let me help you." She nodded slowly, her throat tightening as she allowed herself to admit, if only for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face everything alone. Oliver's health, combined with the mounting financial pressure, had left her feeling as if the ground was slipping beneath her feet. Was it truly selfless, or was he just looking for something in return? That night, after her shift, she sat alone in the small apartment she shared with Oliver, going over the numbers once again. Lily knew that her savings wouldn't last much longer, and she couldn't keep putting Oliver's health at risk just because she was too proud to ask for help. The sound of keys jangling in the door pulled her out of her thoughts. Oliver entered, his face pale, but his eyes were brighter than usual. "Hey," he greeted her with a weak smile, How's everything at the cafe? She didn't want him to see how worried she was, how desperate she felt for answers that didn't seem to be coming. How are you feeling? Oliver shrugged, though the tightness in his posture gave away how much pain he was still in. I'm okay, just tired. Lily felt a pang of guilt. He was trying so hard to keep up appearances for her, and she could tell it was taking a toll on him. About the doctor's bill. I can't keep paying this on my own. You're not thinking of asking him, are you? He knew she was right, but the idea of relying on someone outside their small world was a bitter thought for him. They had always managed on their own, scraping by with what little they had. I know you don't want to, but I think it might be the only way we can afford the treatment you need, Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. Oliver didn't say anything at first, but the tension in the room was palpable. Finally, he sighed. But I'm scared too. We'll get through this. Together. That night, after Oliver had gone to bed, Lily sat by the window in the dim light, staring out at the dark city skyline. She hadn't been able to shake the nagging feeling that there was something more behind Alexander's offer. It was too convenient, too perfect. With a resolve she hadn't felt in days, Lily picked up her phone and dialed Alexander's number. It rang several times before he answered. Lily? Hi, Alexander, she said, taking a deep breath. I was wondering how long it would take you to come around. Lily didn't take offense to his words. I don't want to take advantage of your generosity, she admitted. But I don't have any other choice. Let me help. That's what I'm here for. She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. I can't promise anything. His words, simple as they were, softened the sharp edge of her pride. He saw her as someone with potential, someone who deserved more. Okay, she whispered. The next few days felt like a blur. Alexander didn't waste any time in getting the process started. A part of Lily still couldn't believe how easily everything was falling into place. But the relief that washed over her every time she thought about Oliver's medical bills being taken care of was enough to quiet her doubts, at least for now. Still, there was something else she had to face. Something she had been avoiding since that first night with Alexander, her own past. Secrets she hadn't wanted to confront in years. It all came rushing back one night, when Lily was cleaning up at the cafe alone. Her eyes drifted to a picture hanging on the wall, one of her family before everything fell apart. She had avoided the facts for so long, convinced that the chaos surrounding her family's collapse had been purely out of bad luck. But now, with everything happening so fast, she realized something she hadn't before. The deaths had been worse than she had imagined. Something darker. Lily stood frozen, the realization sinking in as she picked up the phone to call Alexander. Not now. What had once been a small cafe with its familiar routines and comfortable mediocrity was now an entirely different world. She felt stretched thin, like she was being pulled in every direction. He barely had the strength to get out of bed some mornings, and though Lily tried to mask her concern, it was becoming impossible to hide the worry. Why am I so scared of letting him help? She asked herself, her thoughts restless as she sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment one night, glancing over the papers for the new business plan. She needed someone to share the burden with, someone who would be there, not out of obligation, but because they cared. Her mother's debts, the mess they'd been in, the years of silent struggle, these things had made Lily close off, building walls around her heart. But Alexander had broken through those walls before. Lily had just finished cleaning up after a long shift at the cafe and was about to go to bed when his name lit up her phone screen. With a deep breath, she answered. Lily, Alexander's voice was warm, steady, but there was something else in his tone, something she couldn't quite place. I wanted to check in on you. How's everything going? Lily leaned back against the kitchen counter, her mind racing. Just busy. The cafe's picking up, and the business plan is moving forward, so, you know, just the usual. You've already let me in, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to do this by yourself. The vulnerability in his voice was so unexpected that it caught her off guard. Alexander wasn't just offering her financial help, he was offering something much more valuable, his support, his presence. But Lily couldn't bring herself to accept it. The walls she had built around herself, around her heart, were too thick, too high. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of her family's mistakes, her own regrets, and the responsibility of taking care of Oliver. "I'm fine, Alexander," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can handle this." Another long pause. She could almost hear him thinking, weighing his words carefully. "I'm offering partnership. I'm offering to be there for you. I know this isn't easy for you, but I want to be a part of your life." The last few words hit her like a shockwave, rippling through her chest. She hadn't expected him to say that. Could she trust him? Could she let someone in again after all the pain she had been through? But the fear was still there, deep-rooted and impossible to ignore. "Alexander," she began, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can let you in." "I'm not asking for anything from you, Lily," he replied softly, his voice full of conviction. "I want to help because I see who you are." She felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. Slowly, gently, they started to crumble, piece by piece. It was terrifying to let go of the fear, but a small part of her couldn't deny the truth in his words. He wasn't like the others. "Take all the time you need, Lily. I'm here for you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, not wanting to let the vulnerability overwhelm her. She wasn't ready to admit it yet, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like someone saw her. Not as a charity case, not as someone to be fixed, but as someone worthy of care, of help. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling her heart flutter at the rawness of the moment. "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "That's enough for me." Maybe it was time to trust again. The next few days were a delicate balance between the chaos of the cafe, managing Oliver's condition, and navigating the uncomfortable space between her and Alexander. Lily had agreed to let him help, but the process of opening up, of trusting someone with her fears and her burdens, was proving to be harder than she imagined. Every time she saw him, she felt the weight of her decision press down on her. Had she done the right thing? It felt like a test, one that she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Yet, as the days passed, she began to notice something. She was no longer as burdened as she had been before. But with that hope came a nagging feeling, a sense of guilt that she hadn't yet fully acknowledged. Despite his kind words, despite his promises of partnership, there was still a part of her that was holding back. She knew that the emotional walls she had built over the years weren't going to come down in a matter of days. It would take time that, at the moment, she wasn't sure she had. One evening, after another exhausting day, Lily found herself alone in the small apartment. Lily sat in the kitchen, surrounded by papers, her mind spinning. It was almost midnight, and she still had work to do for the cafe, but she couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation she'd had with Alexander earlier in the week. "I'm here for you. Whenever you're ready." She ran a hand through her hair, her mind tangled in uncertainty. What if I never get ready? What if the walls she had built around herself were too strong to ever tear down? Would letting him in just lead to more disappointment? But in the quiet of the apartment, the silence pressing in around her, Lily knew that she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She couldn't do this alone. The truth was, she had been fooling herself into thinking she could. And now, with Alexander's help, things were starting to change. They were changing faster than she could process. She glanced at the screen and saw Alexander's name flash across it. Why was he calling so late? "Lily?" His voice came through the phone, warm and steady as always. Lily's heart skipped another beat. What does he want? How's everything on your end? Same as usual. Busy, but I wanted to check in. How are you holding up? Actually, I'm not sure, she admitted quietly. Things are moving forward with the business plan, and Oliver's treatments are going well, but I feel like I'm losing control. Like I'm caught between two worlds, one where I can handle everything myself, and the other where I'm relying on you. There was a long pause on the other end, and then Alexander's voice came through, soft and understanding. Lily, you don't have to control everything. That's the whole point of partnership. His words sank into her, heavy but soothing. I'm not alone. The thought was still foreign, still difficult to accept. But as much as she tried to resist, A part of her was beginning to realize that maybe it was time to stop running from the help he offered. Maybe it was time to trust, to let herself lean on someone who wanted to be there, not because he had to, but because he chose to. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Lily confessed, her voice shaky with emotion. "It's hard to change that. But you don't have to do it all at once." Lily closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her like a wave. There was something in his tone, a sincerity that made her feel safe, even in the midst of her uncertainty. "Scared of everything. You're already doing more than you think. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm not here to judge or expect anything from you. I'm here to help. And when you're ready, I'll be here. That's the whole point of partnership." Could it really be that simple? "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can let go of the fear." "You don't have to do it all at once, Lily. Trust me." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lily allowed herself to believe that it might be possible. Maybe this could work. Maybe I don't have to do everything alone. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Okay, I'll try. That's all I'm asking. One step at a time." "Thank you, Alexander," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt something shift inside her, a tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Maybe it wasn't so scary to trust after all. Lily had always prided herself on being independent, but as the days went by, something began to change inside her. The weight of her responsibilities, the cafe, Oliver's health, the medical bills, had been pressing on her for so long that she hadn't realized just how much it had been affecting her. Now, with Alexander's offer on the table and the growing sense of partnership, she was starting to feel a shift, albeit a subtle one. She was still cautious, still unsure of what this new chapter in her life would look like. She was terrified. Terrified of trusting him fully. What if she was making a huge mistake? It was during one of those sleepless nights that the phone call came. Lily had just gotten out of bed, hoping to find some relief in a glass of water, when the familiar vibration of her phone broke through the silence. "Hello? Lily?" The voice on the other end was steady, calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, like something was wrong. It was Alexander's voice. "I'm sorry to wake you," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "I've been thinking about something, and I need to talk to you. Can you meet me tomorrow? It's important." What could be so urgent at this hour? "Sure," she said, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. "I'll pick you up. I just need you to trust me on this." That word seemed to echo in her mind long after the conversation ended. She had come so far, had allowed herself to lean on him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. The next morning, Lily woke up early, the usual weight of exhaustion dragging at her limbs. She had a million things to do, from managing the cafe to checking in with the doctors about Oliver. His eyes weren't warm with the usual amusement, they were focused, intense, as if he were carrying a heavy burden. "I will be," Alexander said softly, keeping his eyes on the road. Lily watched him, sensing the tension in his shoulders. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his voice quieter now. "About you, about your brother, about the future. And I realized that there are things I haven't told you. Things I need you to understand." What did he mean? Lily felt a wave of unease wash over her. What was he talking about? "I'm not just some businessman offering help because I feel sorry for you," he continued, his voice steady but firm. "I care about you, Lily. More than you realize. But there are things about my past that I need to share with you. It's about trust." Lily's chest tightened as she processed his words. He cared about her. "Please tell me what's going on," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anticipation. Alexander finally turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. "Lily, I've been hiding something from you. There's a reason I came into your life when I did. Something that I thought I could keep hidden, but now, I think you need to know. But the truth is, I've been carrying a secret for a long time. Darker than you can imagine. I never wanted you to be a part of that world, but I think you deserve to know the truth about why I'm here." Lily's head was spinning. A secret? His family's business? What could he possibly be hiding? Are you involved in something illegal? She asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. No, Alexander said quickly, his voice firm but reassuring. It's not like that. It's just, there are decisions I've made, paths I've taken, and things I've had to do to protect my family and my company. Lily's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. What was he saying? He reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. I care about you, Lily. And I want you to understand why this is so important. The truth is, you're the only person I've ever been willing to open up to. Tears filled Lily's eyes as she processed his words. This was more than just an offer of help. It was something deeper. She had come to rely on him, to trust him in ways she hadn't expected, but now, with his confession hanging in the air, she realized that everything was changing. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice breaking. You don't have to say anything yet. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. As the moment hung between them, Lily realized that this was the turning point. There were no more walls between them. And it was terrifying. But maybe, just maybe, it could be everything they both needed. Lily sat in the car, her hand still in Alexander's, her mind racing with a mix of emotions. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, pushing everyone away, convincing herself that she didn't need anyone. And now, in the span of just a few days, everything had changed. Alexander's words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Could she really let go of her fears? Could she truly allow him into her life, into her heart? She pulled her hand away gently, looking out at the park in front of them. The evening sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet space. This is the turning point, she thought. This is where everything changes. I'm just asking for the chance to show you that I can be someone you can rely on. I don't know how to trust anyone again, she confessed, her voice shaking. I've spent so long being alone, making my own way. Asking for help feels like admitting that I've failed. It doesn't mean you failed, Lily. And sometimes, being human means allowing yourself to accept help, to let others in. You don't have to carry this all by yourself. The weight of his words hit her like a wave. Maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something better. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart calm as she faced him. I don't know what comes next, she said quietly, but I want to try. I want to try trusting you, Alexander. I can't promise it'll be easy. That's all I ask, he said softly, his voice full of sincerity. The car was silent for a moment as Lily processed the gravity of the moment. But she knew, deep down, that she had made the right choice. She didn't need grand gestures or promises. She just needed to take things one step at a time. Everything. Alexander listened intently, his gaze steady and encouraging. You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready, he said gently. But I'm here, whenever you are. Lily paused, taking a deep breath. I've been hiding from the truth for so long. My mother, she didn't just have financial problems. She made some decisions that led to a lot of pain, for both of us. I buried everything. Her debts, the restaurant, the shame of it all. I'm sorry, Lily, Alexander said quietly, his voice full of empathy. She smiled faintly. No one did. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I kept my head down and did everything on my own, I could make it all go away. But now it feels like it's all catching up to me. Alexander reached for her hand again, his touch warm and reassuring. Lily felt a lump form in her throat. Maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild. Maybe it wasn't too late to forgive herself. I'm scared, she whispered. Scared that if I face it all, if I deal with the mess my mother left behind, I won't know how to move forward. Alexander smiled, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. I'm here to help you rebuild, to take it one step at a time. Lily had no idea what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. As they reached the park's edge, Alexander stopped and turned to face her. Are you ready to take the next step, Lily? She nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and hope. Yes, I think I am. Lily looked up at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel, a sense of possibility.